I woke up to stark white walls, a beeping monitor, and the sterile smell of disinfectant. At first, panic set in. I had no memory of how I had arrived in this psychiatric facility. The nurse glanced at me and said, 3 days, as if that explained everything. I was healthy, lucid, and fully aware of my surroundings, yet something was terribly wrong. Days later, the horrifying truth emerged. My son Lucas had drugged me, declared me unstable, and committed me without cause. Worse, he had sold my $750,000 house to his father-in-law for a fraction of its value. Betrayal twisted in my chest. I felt shock, rage, and disbelief, but I knew I had to act. With careful planning, subtle observation, and the patience I had cultivated over decades, I prepared to turn Lucas's crime into a reckoning he would never forget. This was not just about justice. It was about reclaiming control, dignity, and my life. My name is Helen Crawford, and I'm 65 years old. I woke up to bright, sterile lights, white walls, and the antiseptic smell of a place I didn't recognize. Panic gripped me as I tried to move, my body stiff from confinement, my mind foggy from something I couldn't yet place. The bed rails, the monitor beeping softly beside me, and the distant murmur of staff conversations made me realize this was not my home. Fear surged. How did I get here? My heart pounded, my hands shook, but a stubborn clarity told me I was still lucid. Something was terribly wrong. I could sense danger, yet I had no memory of arriving here. The realization hit slowly but unmistakably. I was trapped in a psychiatric facility against my will, and I had no idea why. The first hours were a blur of fear and disorientation. The sterile environment amplified every sound, the hum of the air conditioning, distant footsteps, and faint chatter, while I tried to piece together how I had ended up here. I pressed the call button nervously, unsure what to say or who would answer. Panic made my thoughts race. Every scenario felt worse than the last. I ran my hands over the sheets, trying to ground myself, and glanced at the windowless room, realizing that escape wasn't an option. Questions clawed at my mind. Was I sick? Had I had an accident? The cold reality sank in. None of this made sense. Every moment stretched painfully as fear and confusion battled with the stubborn awareness that I was fully conscious, healthy, and trapped in a place designed to make me question my own sanity. Finally, a nurse entered, clipboard in hand, her expression neutral. "You've been here for 3 days," she said casually, as if that explained everything. I stared, stunned, trying to comprehend the words. 3 days. I had no memory of arriving, no explanation for why I was confined, and yet she spoke with calm authority. My mind raced, attempting to recall events, conversations, or any clue that could explain this nightmare. The sterile room seemed to close in as I realized that time had passed without my knowledge, leaving me disoriented and powerless. Questions multiplied. Why wasn't my son here? Why had nobody contacted me? Her words, simple and factual, triggered a chilling realization that something was very wrong, and that my presence here was no accident. As the initial shock wore off, I began assessing myself. I was lucid, my mind was clear. My body was healthy, free of pain or injury beyond minor stiffness. I could reason, think, and plan. Yet, despite this clarity, I was trapped, confined by walls, procedures, and a system that assumed instability I did not possess. The incongruity was infuriating. How could I be considered unstable when I knew perfectly well I was not? Anger began to replace panic, and determination replaced confusion. My senses, my memory, my reasoning were intact. The stark realization hit hard. I was being held not for my safety, but for someone else's convenience, someone's deception. Every detail of the room, the locked doors, the monotony, the cold efficiency, reinforced the betrayal that had brought me here. Questions about the circumstances quickly turned into suspicion. Who could benefit from me being here? The thought of my son, Lucas, flashed immediately. Could he be involved? The mere idea made my chest tighten and my hands tremble. Pieces of vague memories surfaced, moments of tension, his greed, hints of frustration about my house and finances. A seed of understanding began to form. This was not an accident, nor a medical necessity. I realized that someone had deliberately orchestrated this confinement, weaponizing the system against me. Anger mixed with resolve as I silently vowed to uncover the truth. Being trapped in this clinical, controlled environment had awakened a determination to reclaim my life, my property, and my dignity. The betrayal was deep, but so was my resolve. Confirmation came painfully. I overheard snippets of conversation from staff and a hurried phone call. Lucas had acted. He had drugged me, manipulated documents, and labeled me unstable to have me committed. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. My own son, the person I had trusted most, had orchestrated a crime against me. Shock and disbelief battled with anger and hurt, leaving me dizzy but focused. The realization brought clarity. I was not only a victim, but also a target of greed. Every detail of the plan that had trapped me now became a puzzle I intended to solve. The combination of fear, fury, and cunning surged through me. I would not allow this to stand. Lucas had underestimated me, and that mistake would be his undoing. The final blow came when I discovered the financial betrayal. My $750,000 house, the home filled with decades of memories, had been sold to his father in law for a mere $511,000. My stomach churned with a mix of grief, disbelief, and rage. Lucas had not only committed me but had profited from it, stripping me of security and legacy. Yet amidst the fury, a spark of determination ignited. I would turn this crime into his worst nightmare. Every detail, every misstep he had made would become leverage. I began quietly plotting, analyzing, and strategizing. Being trapped, betrayed, and robbed had awakened a cunning resolve. Lucas's greed and arrogance would meet consequences he never anticipated, and justice would be mine to orchestrate. Helen quickly realized that knowledge was her first weapon. She observed the daily routines of the psychiatric facility with painstaking attention: nurses, shift changes, visiting hours, and security protocols. Every movement, every pattern became a clue, revealing the facility's vulnerabilities and opportunities. She noticed which staff were attentive, which were careless, and which could be persuaded to assist. Helen also took mental notes of the routines her son might assume she was unaware of, imagining how he expected her to be powerless. Each observation heightened her awareness, turning the sterile environment into a chessboard where she carefully analyzed each piece. The hours of quiet watching built a foundation of intelligence she would later use to confront betrayal, recover her house, and orchestrate justice, transforming fear into strategic advantage. It didn't take long for Helen to notice Lucas visiting the facility. She watched him pace in the waiting room, whispering to staff with an air of overconfidence, clearly assuming she had no comprehension of his actions. His arrogance was palpable. He smirked as though victory was already his. Helen catalogued his habits, noting times, phrases, and subtle gestures. Every interaction revealed more than words alone. Hesitation, tension, and moments of frustration gave her insight into his personality and motives. By observing without being seen, Helen gained a clearer picture of how Lucas operated, his overconfidence becoming a weakness. Each visit was a lesson, each whispered comment a confirmation of betrayal, and each gesture a potential clue to reclaiming both her property and her dignity. One afternoon, Helen overheard Lucas on the phone with his father-in-law, his voice dripping with smugness. "She won't even remember this place when she wakes up," he said confidently. "It's all finalized, she's out of the picture." The words cut like ice. Every sentence revealed arrogance, greed, and underestimation of her intelligence. Helen listened intently, deciphering tone, inflection, and implied assumptions. She recognized that Lucas's overconfidence was her leverage. These stolen glimpses into his plans and mindset allowed her to anticipate actions, expose weaknesses, and craft a precise strategy for retaliation. The facility's walls, once symbols of imprisonment, had become a stage for gathering intelligence. Helen's fury blended with focus. She would turn these arrogant assumptions against him, ensuring that the son who betrayed her would soon regret ever underestimating her. Helen began documenting everything meticulously. She memorized dates, overheard statements, and observed interactions between staff and Lucas, creating a mental record of every betrayal and illegality. Her notebook became a tool of empowerment, each note a piece of a larger puzzle. She cataloged what he had done to commit her, manipulate the facility, and sell her house below market value. Evidence of greed, deception, and manipulation was captured silently, carefully, and without alerting Lucas or anyone else. The act of documentation transformed panic into control. Each written detail fueled her determination. Helen now possessed the information needed to expose the full extent of Lucas's crime, strengthening her plan to reclaim her life, her property, and her dignity while leaving no room for his denials or manipulations. As Helen pieced together evidence, she also began noticing cracks in Lucas's plan. His arrogance made him careless, documents left unsecured, staff easily influenced, and inconsistencies in timing revealed exploitable mistakes. Each flaw became a potential tool for her strategy, turning his confidence into vulnerability. Helen imagined how she could exploit these weaknesses, timing revelations, observations, and legal maneuvers with precision. The more she observed, the more she realized that Lucas had overplayed his hand. Her mind, sharp and methodical, began constructing scenarios in which his miscalculations would be exposed, turning his criminal actions into liabilities. The discovery of these weaknesses fueled hope and reinforced the plan she would execute to reclaim her life and hold Lucas accountable. Over the next few days, Helen gathered hints about her son-in-law's involvement. Lucas's father-in-law had facilitated the underpriced sale, his conversations betraying both greed and disregard for ethical boundaries. Helen overheard subtle comments, exchanged glances, and phone whispers, noting that the man assumed she had no knowledge. Each revelation added context to the crime, showing that the betrayal extended beyond Lucas alone. Understanding the father-in-law's motivations allowed Helen to plan interventions carefully, targeting not only her son's arrogance, but also the complicit enabler who had profited from deception. Knowledge became her power, each secret revealing how she could leverage information to reclaim her house, exact justice, and orchestrate consequences for everyone involved. With evidence gathered and weaknesses exposed, Helen began formulating her strategy. Every observation, note, and overheard statement became part of a master plan to regain control, reclaim her property, and teach Lucas a lesson he would never forget. She considered timing, legal avenues, and subtle psychological tactics, ensuring her approach would be precise and effective. Helen also anticipated possible obstacles, imagining Lucas's reactions and ways to counter them without alerting him to her knowledge. The plan was ambitious, delicate, and cinematic, turning betrayal into opportunity, fear into empowerment. As she reviewed every detail mentally, Helen's resolve strengthened. She would not only recover her house, but also restore dignity, enforce justice, and transform the son who betrayed her into someone who understood the cost of underestimating his mother. Helen spent hours quietly analyzing every piece of information she had gathered. She realized that direct confrontation might backfire, so she focused on subtle strategies to expose Lucas. Every overheard conversation, every observed reaction, and every flaw in his plan became a tool. She considered ways to present evidence without alerting him, ensuring that the revelation would feel natural and irrefutable. Small, calculated interactions with staff and carefully timed questions became part of her strategy. Helen imagined the moment when Lucas would realize that his arrogance had blinded him to her intelligence. The plan was methodical, patient, and precise. Gather witnesses, document everything, and use psychology to force acknowledgement of his crimes. Every detail mattered. Missteps, timing, and emotional responses were all carefully mapped to ensure justice would be served without chaos. Helen knew she couldn't act alone. She began building quiet alliances with staff members who seemed kind, observant, or sympathetic. Through small gestures, subtle conversations, and careful timing, she gauged who could be trusted. She didn't reveal her plan outright, but used tactful hints to measure their willingness to support her. The process required patience. She needed to avoid raising suspicion while ensuring she could rely on backup if needed. Each staff member who subtly aligned with her added strength to her strategy. Helen mentally cataloged their strengths, tendencies, and likely reactions. By the end of several careful days, she had a small network of potential allies who could corroborate her observations and support her when the time came to confront Lucas. Her confidence grew, knowing she had quietly strengthened her position. Helen devised subtle ways to test Lucas's reactions without revealing her awareness. She posed neutral questions about his visits and casually referenced topics that he assumed she wouldn't notice. Each reaction, hesitation, defensiveness, or overconfidence was carefully noted. She observed microexpressions, shifts in tone and body language, piecing together his personality, arrogance, and likely responses. These tests were delicate. Any misstep could alert him to her awareness. By strategically probing, Helen confirmed her suspicions about his overconfidence and identified moments where he underestimated her intelligence. Each interaction added precision to her plan, allowing her to anticipate his moves and prepare calculated responses. Through observation and subtle experimentation, Helen turned her son's arrogance into a weakness she could exploit, building the foundation for the confrontation and eventual reclaiming of her house. Helen began exploring legal avenues and social strategies to reclaim her property and assert her rights. She researched property laws, mental health regulations, and fraud statutes, noting timelines and critical evidence she would need. Simultaneously, she considered social pressure, how neighbors, friends, and even staff could witness the truth and indirectly support her case. By mapping both legal and social paths, Helen created multiple avenues for achieving justice. Her mind worked like a strategist, weighing probabilities, contingencies, and leverage points. Each pathway was carefully considered, ensuring that when the confrontation arrived, she could combine legal authority with social clarity to make Lucas's deception impossible to hide. The detailed planning gave her a sense of control and assurance that every move would contribute to a comprehensive victory. Helen began pinpointing individuals who could act as witnesses or allies. From attentive staff to neighbors who knew her financial history, she quietly evaluated their reliability and discretion. Every potential ally was carefully observed to ensure loyalty and credibility. Helen also considered indirect witnesses, people whose statements could corroborate her version of events without directly exposing her tactics. Each observation became part of a mental map of influence, ensuring that she had support both inside and outside the facility. By identifying allies in advance, she strengthened her plan and reduced risk, creating layers of security for her eventual confrontation with Lucas. Helen's methodical approach gave her confidence that she would not only expose the betrayal, but also have undeniable support in doing so. With intelligence gathered, Helen crafted a precise plan for confronting Lucas at the right moment. She considered timing, audience, evidence presentation, and psychological impact. Her plan included subtle reveals, careful use of witnesses, and orchestrated scenarios that would make denial impossible. Each step was mapped out: when to speak, what to say, and how to observe his reactions. She anticipated excuses, lies, and deflections, creating contingencies for every potential response. The confrontation would be controlled, dignified, and irreversible. Helen visualized the sequence repeatedly, ensuring every movement and word was deliberate. By meticulously crafting the plan, she turned her strategy into a cinematic orchestration of justice, blending patience, intelligence, and subtle power. Helen spent quiet hours mentally rehearsing every detail of the confrontation and the steps needed to reclaim her property. She imagined Lucas's reactions, the staff's responses, and her own delivery of evidence and subtle truths. Each scenario was tested in her mind, from worst-case missteps to ideal outcomes. She envisioned timing, tone, body language, and phrasing, ensuring that her actions would be precise, persuasive, and effective. Mental rehearsal strengthened her confidence, transforming anxiety into focus. By preparing for every contingency, Helen ensured she would act with clarity and calm authority when the time came. The planning was exhaustive but necessary. Every detail would contribute to the ultimate goal: reclaiming her house, restoring dignity, and turning betrayal into justice, all orchestrated with quiet brilliance. Helen carefully orchestrated a situation designed to expose Lucas's deception without alerting him. She arranged a casual meeting with staff and potential witnesses, ensuring that all parties would be present when he arrived. Subtle questions and comments were planted beforehand to provoke reactions, guiding Lucas to speak without realizing Helen's awareness. Every step was meticulously timed, every glance and gesture observed. Helen's calm exterior masked the storm of anticipation inside her. She watched as Lucas entered, confident in his assumed victory, unaware that each word he spoke, each lie he tried to pass off, was being catalogued and witnessed. By the time he realized the trap, it was too late. Helen's careful orchestration had created the perfect stage for truth, forcing exposure while maintaining control and dignity. With Lucas unknowingly ensnared, Helen subtly indicated to the assembled witnesses that she was fully aware of the deceit. Small, intentional gestures, a raised eyebrow, a slight smile, a casual reference, signaled knowledge without confrontation. Staff and other onlookers, having seen Lucas's overconfidence and subtle inconsistencies, began piecing together the story. Helen's controlled demeanor lent authority to her silent revelations, making it clear that the truth was already known. The tension in the room grew as Lucas began to sense that something was wrong. Helen's brilliance lay in her subtlety. The witnesses understood her message without her uttering a single accusatory word. By carefully revealing awareness, she empowered the bystanders and set the stage for the dramatic public confrontation. ensuring that every lie Lucas had relied upon would be exposed in full view. Helen finally confronted Lucas directly, presenting her evidence with measured precision. Documents, recorded statements, and carefully gathered notes were revealed one by one, each undeniable and factual. Lucas stammered, attempting excuses and denials, but Helen remained calm and authoritative, refusing to be rattled by his arrogance. Her voice was firm yet composed, each word delivering the weight of truth. Witnesses leaned in, following the sequence of events as Lucas's lies unraveled. The contrast between Helen's poise and Lucas's escalating desperation was stark, highlighting the consequences of his greed and betrayal. Each piece of evidence was a strike of clarity, dismantling his assumed control. By confronting him publicly with meticulous preparation, Helen ensured that his deception could no longer hide behind arrogance or manipulation. Lucas's reaction was immediate and visceral. Shock froze his features, denial twisted his expressions, and desperation flickered in his eyes as the reality of exposure sank in. Helen observed each microexpression carefully, noting his faltering confidence and the cracks in his previously smug demeanor. His voice wavered as he tried to justify actions that were now clearly indefensible. The witnesses, previously uncertain, now realized the depth of the betrayal. Helen felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that patience, observation, and careful planning had orchestrated this moment. Every microreaction, every tremor of anxiety, confirmed the effectiveness of her strategy. Lucas had underestimated his mother, misjudged her intelligence, and assumed impunity. But now the facade had crumbled, leaving him fully exposed before witnesses who now understood the truth. Helen then directed attention to Lucas's father-in-law, who had participated in the underpriced sale of her house. Calmly, she presented the evidence connecting him to the transaction and emphasized his role in enabling the theft. The man faltered under scrutiny, realizing the meticulous planning and knowledge Helen possessed. Witnesses looked on as he attempted to explain, stammering and defensive, but Helen's authority left no room for denial. Every document, every detail, every inconsistency was presented clearly, forcing acknowledgement without public humiliation. The subtle social pressure, combined with undeniable evidence, ensured accountability. By addressing the father-in-law directly, Helen removed any remaining enablers of the crime, consolidating her victory and preparing for the final resolution of justice and empowerment. Helen leveraged social pressure as a tool to secure the return of her property. Friends, staff, and witnesses who had quietly followed the unfolding events now supported her position, their observations reinforcing her authority. Lucas and his father-in-law realized that the scrutiny extended beyond Helen's personal confrontation. Community and institutional observation amplified the consequences of their actions. Helen calmly articulated the rightful ownership of her house, emphasizing fairness, legality, and ethics. The social weight, combined with evidence, left them no room for continued resistance. Slowly, the property's return became inevitable. Helen's patience, observation, and strategic orchestration transformed betrayal into a public reckoning. Through subtle, calculated social influence, she ensured that justice would be served not only legally but socially, reaffirming her control and dignity. With Lucas and his father-in-law fully exposed and the return of her house secured, Helen prepared for the final stage, asserting her empowerment. She reflected on the journey, from betrayal to strategic planning, observation, and confrontation, and knew that the ultimate victory required calm, clarity, and dignity. Every word she would speak, every action she would take, was designed to cement authority and demonstrate resilience. Helen envisioned how her life would proceed, free from manipulation and deceit, with boundaries firmly established. This final reckoning was not about vengeance, but about reclaiming autonomy and respect. As she prepared mentally and emotionally, Helen felt a sense of quiet triumph, the culmination of patience, intelligence, and careful orchestration, turning betrayal into empowerment and establishing justice on her terms. Don't miss how Helen turns the tables on her son and takes back everything he stole. Hit like and subscribe now, because the best part of her revenge is coming. Helen stepped into the room with quiet confidence, her evidence meticulously organized. Lucas tried to maintain his smirk, but it faltered the moment she began revealing the depth of his deception. Every lie, every manipulative act, every attempt to profit from her commitment was laid bare. Staff, neighbors, and witnesses listened intently as Helen recounted timelines, statements, and actions, leaving no room for denial. Lucas's face went pale. He stumbled through excuses that crumbled under the weight of documented facts. The room seemed to hold its breath as Helen's calm authority dismantled his overconfidence piece by piece. By the time she finished, Lucas understood. There was no hiding, no charm, no denial. Helen had orchestrated a masterful exposure, transforming betrayal into undeniable truth and asserting her presence as the one fully in control. Helen addressed Lucas directly, her voice firm but composed, teaching lessons he couldn't ignore. Greed blinds judgment, Lucas, she said, her tone unshakable. Betrayal may seem profitable, but consequences always find those who underestimate others. Every word was deliberate, revealing wisdom earned over decades and patience cultivated through adversity. Witnesses nodded subtly, sensing the power in her measured delivery. Helen's calm authority was more impactful than anger could ever be. Lucas's shame was internalized, his arrogance dismantled without spectacle. The room absorbed the weight of her statements, recognizing both the injustice and the intelligence with which it was addressed. Helen had transformed the confrontation into a moral lesson, teaching not only her son but all present about respect, integrity, and the cost of deceit, proving that true empowerment comes from control and composure. Lucas's overconfidence evaporated as the consequences of his actions became undeniable. Socially, friends and colleagues who had admired his bravado now questioned his integrity. Financially, the evidence and social pressure forced him to acknowledge errors in the property transaction. Emotionally, guilt, shame, and fear settled into his demeanor as he realized the full scope of his betrayal. Helen watched quietly, observing every microexpression, every falter in his tone, every tremor of anxiety. She didn't revel in cruelty, she relished justice. Lucas had learned firsthand the cost of greed and manipulation, experiencing a reckoning tailored perfectly to his actions. Helen's strategy, patience, and intelligence ensured that these consequences were effective, public enough to create accountability but tempered by dignity, transforming punishment into a lesson that would last a lifetime. With Lucas and his father-in-law fully exposed, Helen took back ownership of her house. Legal and social pressure aligned perfectly, leaving no obstacles to reclaim her property. Walking through the familiar halls, she felt a surge of triumph and relief. This was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of regained control, dignity, and freedom from betrayal. Helen reflected on how calculated patience, observation, and strategic planning had turned the tables, transforming a moment of helplessness into empowerment. Every corner of the house echoed with memories and resilience, reminding her that she had survived deception and manipulation. Reclaiming her home was the culmination of her intelligence, endurance, and determination, solidifying her independence and reinforcing the lesson that betrayal could be confronted and overcome without losing composure or strength. The aftermath reshaped family relationships. Lucas, humbled and aware of his misjudgment, began to show respect and restraint. Other family members, witnesses to the confrontation, reassessed dynamics and recognized Helen's wisdom, composure, and authority. The subtle shift was powerful. Trust and accountability replaced fear and manipulation. Helen's calm strategy had not only reclaimed her property but also reset boundaries, ensuring that respect was earned, not assumed. Conversations changed. Interactions became thoughtful rather than dismissive. Helen observed the transformation with quiet satisfaction, understanding that empowerment was as much about teaching awareness as it was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Family dynamics now aligned with integrity and recognition of her intelligence, creating a healthier environment where betrayal could no longer thrive. Later, Helen sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the journey. From being drugged and committed to reclaiming her house, every step had required patience, intelligence, and careful observation. She thought about how her resilience had guided her, how strategy had converted fear into action, and how dignity had amplified her authority. The ordeal had tested her emotionally, mentally, and socially, yet she emerged not only victorious but wiser. Each decision, each observation, each subtle maneuver had contributed to her success. Helen understood the power of patience and awareness, the importance of measured action, and the strength of intellect over brute force. Her reflection was not just about revenge. It was about survival, empowerment, and the profound satisfaction of reclaiming control over a life threatened by betrayal. As the day ended, Helen looked out at the sunset, a serene smile gracing her face. Justice had been served, her home was hers again, her dignity restored, and Lucas's arrogance dismantled. The journey from betrayal to empowerment had been long, requiring patience, observation, and strategic brilliance. She felt the quiet triumph of intelligence over deceit, the satisfaction of turning victimhood into authority. The house was more than a property. It was a symbol of resilience, cunning, and reclaimed power. Helen understood that true victory came from composure, planning, and unwavering self-belief. In that moment, she felt unstoppable, a master of her destiny, having transformed manipulation, greed, and betrayal into a story of cinematic justice and personal triumph that would be remembered, respected, and recounted for years to come.